Week 3 of fantasy football is kicking off tomorrow, and I have my top 36 running back rankings for you guys to help set your fantasy football lineups. But first, let's get into the injury updates. From last week, we have Aaron Jones heading to IR. He will be out for the next 4 games at least with a hamstring pull. Wheels up for Jordan Mason. I'm sure everybody who has him is very excited. Austin Eckler is out for the season with a torn Achilles. So that's an upgrade to Bill, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt, and let's see how involved Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez are into that Commanders backfield. So those are the 2 major injuries from a week ago that is updated. And then we do have some guys that are listed questionable, but I do expect them to be fine. Josh Jacobs, limited practice all week with an ankle injury. DeAndre Swift, limited practice all week with a quad injury. Both are listed questionable, but I expect them to go. Tyrone Tracy, limited practice all week with a calf injury. He doesn't actually carry a designation going into Sunday's game against the Chiefs. And then Byshell Tootin, limited practice all week with a shoulder injury. Monitor the Saturday reports because we might get some updates on some guys. I will drop any updates that come out in the pinned comment after this video goes live. The only concerning one, the only one that I expect to be out this week is Zach Charbonnet, who is officially listed doubtful to play Sunday with a foot injury. He has not practiced pretty much all week. So if you guys have Kenneth Walker, that is a major upgrade to Kenneth Walker's outlook. And now without Zach Charbonnet out there, he does expect to be the lead back. So let's get into the tier list. We're going to start with the top 6 running backs in my week 3 rankings. So we are still 1 week away from the brand new update to the site, but you guys can see there my RB1 on the week is Christian McCaffrey against the Arizona Cardinals. My RB2, Bijan Robinson versus the Carolina Panthers. Jahmyr Gibbs against the Ravens on Monday night. My RB3, Derrick Henry against the Lions on Monday night. My RB4, James Cook locked into my RB5 from Thursday Night Football against the Dolphins. And then Saquon Barkley against the Rams, my RB6 on the week. So moving over to the other view so you guys can see kind of all the metrics that you need to see. The S tier plays, Christian McCaffrey, my RB1 versus the Arizona Cardinals. They are 20th against fantasy running backs through the first 2 games of the season. I am personally scared shitless to play against Christian McCaffrey in the Flock League. CMC is averaging 8.5 targets per game this season, and Purdy is a game time decision to return. Now, it looks like he's not going to start. It looks like he will be out for another game. This game does have a high over-under of 45.5, and that is probably with Mac Jones starting. So it looks like a positive game environment, a positive game script for Christian McCaffrey and the 49ers offense. You guys can see the usage there. We know what Christian McCaffrey does when he's healthy. He is currently the RB3 in fantasy points per game with 23.0. And like I said, a large part of that is that he has a 25% target share on the season. And with Mac Jones starting yet another game, who's very immobile, we expect another monster target performance, unfortunately for me, from Christian McCaffrey. Fortunately for me in the Flock League, I do have Bijan Robinson, who is my RB2. Bijan's games against the Carolina Panthers in his career speak for themselves. Last season, 25.5 PPR points against the Panthers and 31.3 PPR points against the Panthers. They are currently 24th against fantasy running backs. The Falcons defense is also playing really well. If you've noticed in the Buccaneers game, in the Minnesota Vikings game, they've been able to hold their opponents to, low scoring totals, and the Falcons are favored by 5.5 in this one, and that has really gone well for Bijan Robinson. Despite facing 2 really tough run defenses in the Buccaneers and Vikings the first 2 weeks, he is still the RB5 in fantasy, 22.1 PPR points, and a large part of that has also come on the back of the fact that he has a 20% target share, and in week 1 against the Buccaneers, he went for 100+ receiving yards, and he's been really efficient no matter what. So this could be, for these 2 running backs, a 30+ point performance with my RB1 and 2, which is why they are ranked there. Jahmyr Gibbs versus the Baltimore Ravens on Monday night, a 53-point over-under game on Monday Night Football between Gibbs, my RB3, and Derrick Henry, my RB4. You have the 21st ranked Baltimore Ravens defense for Jahmyr Gibbs and the 10th ranked Lions defense for Derrick Henry. This game will have fireworks, and I want pieces of it. Monitoring Jahmyr Gibbs' workload, it is worth kind of pointing out that his workload has increased marginally from last year, 61% of the snaps, still getting about 40% of the carries, but he is getting 30% targets per route run and 60% route participation. Generally, that's about in line with the Montgomery Jahmyr Gibbs split that we saw a year ago, but it is worth noting his snap share is up just a little bit. He is currently the RB10 in fantasy. We're kind of waiting for that fireworks game out of Jahmyr Gibbs, but I do think we probably could see it against Baltimore on Monday night. And same goes for Derrick Henry. Same about workload that he's been normally getting. He gets mainly carries. He doesn't run a whole lot of routes. He had a monster game in week 1, 29.2 PPR points, but an absolute dud against the Browns in week 2, just 2.3 PPR points in that game where he basically couldn't get anything done on the ground. Running back 5 for me in my rankings was James Cook, who locked into Thursday Night Football against the Miami Dolphins. They were 31st ranked against the run, so it was a great matchup for him. 20.8 PPR points. I'm glad I ranked him aggressively because the dude's an absolute stud, and he keeps rising in my rest of season rankings because last season he was a 49% snap share guy, and through 3 weeks he has a 57% snap share and 65% of the carries. So it looks like that contract is showing some faith in James Cook, and his workload has increased going back to last year. Running back 6 in my rankings is Saquon Barkley against the Los Angeles Rams, who are second against fantasy running backs right now. It's a pretty rough matchup on paper. Minus 11% pass rate over expected are teams versus the Los Angeles Rams this year. The Titans really tried to lean on the run, wasn't very successful. And in week 1, the Texans tried to lean on the run, wasn't very successful. So even though they've been very good against the run, teams are choosing to run the ball against them, even to their detriment, really, because the pass rush is so strong with the Los Angeles Rams. And the Eagles, of course, lead all teams right now with minus 9% pass rate over expected. So the game script favors Saquon Barkley, a lot of carries, a lot of volume. And we know that Saquon Barkley kind of owns this team. If you guys recall, last year he rushed for like 250 yards against them on Sunday Night Football. And then in the playoffs, he also had a monster game against them. So we got a whopping 460 yards in 2 games versus the Rams last year, over 500 total yards in 2 games and 4 touchdowns. So should be a big game for Saquon Barkley in terms of volume. Will he be efficient on said volume? That's yet to be seen. He's currently the RB8 in points per game with an 82% snap share on the season. I expect the Eagles offense to look a little bit better than they've looked through the first 2 weeks of the season. But it could be as a result of Jalen Hurts running, Saquon Barkley running, and that kind of thing. The A-tier plays at the running back position, we have the other RB1s, that is Devon Achane versus the Buffalo Bills, 19th ranked Buffalo defense. We saw him locked into Thursday Night Football. Absurd target volume yet again. He is currently pacing 102 catches this season, and he scams his way to 16.1 PPR points versus the Bills, despite Ollie Gordon sniping him on the goal line. Devon Achane has a 25% target share this year and a 32% target share and 28% target share in back-to-back weeks. So we are seeing him just get absolutely absurd target volume. He is currently averaging 19.6 PPR points per game, which is top 6 among fantasy running backs. Running back 8 for me is Jonathan Taylor versus the Tennessee Titans, and I regret to inform you guys that Sal also has him. So in addition to Christian McCaffrey, I'm probably going to be fucked on multiple occasions here because he has a monster duo of running backs. The Tennessee Titans with the 14th ranked run defense. The Colts right now are a top 10 rushing EPA offense versus a defensive line in Tennessee that is getting manhandled at the point of attack against the run. They are top 3 in rushing success rate allowed. So this game kind of screams Jonathan Taylor blow-up spot. And if you guys are playing on underdog this weekend, I like him to go higher than his 90.5 rushing yards. I think this basically just screams a 100-yard rushing day for Jonathan Taylor. And as you guys can see, in week 1, before they were blowing out the Dolphins, he was basically playing every single snap. In week 2, closer game script versus the Denver Broncos, he does in fact play basically every single snap. He is basically getting the utilization that we dream of for fantasy football running backs. Jonathan Taylor is a top 7 running back for me rest of season, and he should have a monster game in this one. Bucky Irving versus the New York Jets. They are 24th ranked against the run. Bucks are down their starting left tackle, and right guard. Luke Gadecki, the right tackle, Cody Melk, the right guard, are on IR. Luke Gadecki probably won't be back for 4 weeks. Melk out for the season. Tristan Wirfs still not coming back from that knee injury, and our center, Graham Barton, is playing left tackle. So we basically have 4 players outside of their positions right now on the offensive line, and it's kind of in shambles at the moment. So be patient with Bucky Irving if he's not being efficient right now, which he hasn't really been totally. We are running the ball still at like a top 10 EPA clip. It's just been that we haven't seen those big plays. We haven't seen the offense look like it did in 2024. And I don't really think it's necessarily due to the fact that Liam Cohen's no longer there. I honestly just think it's because of these offensive line injuries and the fact that Chris Godwin's not out there as well. And Emeka Egbuka is a rookie. So Jalen McMillan's not out there. Like, this offense just needs to really get healthy, honestly. And Bucky Irving can cash in on some of that red zone usage once we're in the red zone more often. 75% of the snaps on this offense isn't yielding much more than low-end RB1 numbers as of now. But with Godwin coming back probably next week, with Wirfs coming back probably next week, I would say that the big games for Bucky Irving are coming, so just be patient with him. Running back 10 in my rankings is Kenneth Walker, who's up a major amount of spots here because of Zach Charbonnet probably not being active for this game. The New Orleans Saints are 23rd against fantasy football running backs, and even though Kenneth Walker is averaging a 38% snap share this week, without Zach Charbonnet, that is probably going to increase, and I would imagine that's going to result in Walker really taking hold of this job. The Saints are beatable on the ground, especially for Walker on what should be, I would imagine, a 60 to 70% opportunity share workload, or if not more, because we've seen whenever Walker is out, Charbonnet gets a massive workload. I expect the same to be the case without Charbonnet out there. The Saints are 23rd in EPA allowed to the running back position for a defense that should be easy for Sam Darnold to move the football. So, yeah, make sure Kenneth Walker is in your lineup this week. Alvin Kamara in that same game is my RB11 versus the Seattle defense, which is 29th against fantasy football running backs through 2 weeks. The New Orleans Saints have passed the ball 93 times, and that leads the NFL, and they've also run 67 plays per game, which is top 6 in the NFL. So they're running up-tempo, which is not uncommon for Kellen Moore offenses, and they're also throwing the ball a ton, which is obviously great for Alvin Kamara, who has an 11% target share on the season, but we know Alvin Kamara can catch a lot of passes when those opportunities are presented to them. The weird thing is that Spencer Rattler is actually stretching the field, and he's actually trying to, really push the ball downfield, which is not what we expected coming into the season. We expected this offense to really check the ball down like crazy, and we haven't actually seen that yet. We saw a little bit more of it last week, but I do expect to see a lot of it this week. The Seahawks also have had the 5th most plays run against them as a defense. I like Kamara to hit this yardage total pick here, higher than 84.5 rushing plus receiving yards. He saw 27 total touches last week, and he beat this total by 40 plus. So I do think Alvin Kamara is in line for a pretty big game. And then closing out this back-end RB1s tier, we have Travis Etienne versus the Houston Texans. They are 3rd against fantasy football running backs, but Etienne leads all running backs right now with 7.1 yards per carry. The Texans defense, while they've been good at holding running backs to, low fantasy totals in run defense grade, they're actually ranked 29th per PFF right now. And the Jags are at home in a get-right spot for Brian Thomas Jr. and for Travis Hunter and everyone involved. I think the Jaguars offense is probably going to look a little bit better this week. Travis has this big, beautiful workload for this team right now. And yes, Byshell Tootin was more involved, but he is coming into this game a little banged up with a shoulder injury, even though he sniped that red zone touchdown from Travis Etienne. I think these guys can work in tandem all year as a top 15 running back for Travis Etienne and a weekly kind of upside flex option with Byshell Tootin. Like I said, 64% of the snaps, that'll play. 56% of the rushing attempts, that'll play. And right now, only getting a 9% target share for Travis Etienne, but I actually think that could increase. He is ranked right now as a top 10 running back on the season in terms of the production he's been putting up. So moving into the next tier of running backs, we have the high-end RB2s. In tier list view, we have Josh Jacobs versus the Cleveland Browns, Jordan Mason versus the Cincinnati Bengals, Chase Brown versus the Minnesota Vikings, Ashton Genty versus the Washington Commanders, Javonte Williams versus the Chicago Bears, and Breece Hall versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Starting with Josh Jacobs, he has a brutal matchup versus the Cleveland Browns. They are 4th against fantasy running backs, and as we saw last week, even Derrick Henry struggled against this team. He scored just 2.2 fantasy points against this front last week. Myles Garrett is playing at an absolutely ungodly defensive player of the year level. It's a daunting front for Green Bay, and they may need to win this one with their passing game, with their defense, because that is how you can beat Cleveland so far. If you watch that game against Baltimore last week, the Cleveland front was so good against the run that eventually Baltimore kind of just gave up on running the football. Even in the red zone, they weren't giving the ball to Derrick Henry. They were just continuously putting it in Lamar Jackson's hands, and they were able to get plays done, get big plays downfield, and they are susceptible to that. So hopefully they drop some receptions for Josh Jacobs to give him a nice floor. Hopefully they move the ball on offense enough that they get into the red zone and he can just punch in a touchdown to save his day. But efficiency-wise, I would expect this to be a down game from Josh Jacobs. The workload's excellent right now, 82% of the snaps, 14.2 PPR points per game. I would say if you guys are looking for a nice buy low candidate, Josh Jacobs not a terrible one, because even though he's producing like a mid RB2 right now, he is getting an RB1, like really high-end RB1 workload. Even though it's a tough matchup this week, maybe after this week is when you look to buy low on Josh Jacobs. So running back 14 for me is Jordan Mason versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, no Aaron Jones means wheels up for Jordan Mason. He is going to be a top 15 running back play for me, probably for the next 4 games, especially in this matchup against a Bengals run defense that is 28th against fantasy football running backs. Bengals are an absolute cupcake matchup, and as crazy as it sounds, this offense might move the ball better with Carson Wentz, because JJ McCarthy through 2 games was pretty terrible in like 7 of 8 quarters. So it is a 41.5 point over under, and Carson Wentz is Carson Wentz, and Jake Browning is Jake Browning on the other side of this game. But I think Jordan Mason will have a lot of volume in this one. He was getting like 14-ish carries per game before this happened, and now Aaron Jones being out only solidifies him probably getting 20 plus touches at least in this game. 75.5 rushing yards is his total over on Underdog, and I absolutely love the higher on that. So if you guys are building one out with us, that is what we are going with. And again, Jordan Mason was already playing almost 60% of the snaps. Like, he was legitimately operating as this team's lead back in the short term. So now that Aaron Jones is out, I think that number could jump up all the way to 75, 80% of the snaps like we saw from him in San Francisco last season whenever Christian McCaffrey was out with an injury. We were ranking Jordan Mason as an RB1 pretty much, and I wouldn't be shocked if he has a monster game, and we continue to do that. Running back 15, Chase Brown versus the Minnesota Vikings, staying in that same game. They're about league average against fantasy football running backs. Here's the positive for Chase Brown, because I do think he's a good buy low right now, given that a lot of people are going to be down on this offense without Joe Burrow. Joe Mixon averaged nearly 5 targets per game when Jake Browning started in 2023. And Jake Browning has a career 71% completion percentage. And a lot of that is because he's rather conservative over the middle and he checks down to his running backs a lot. He takes some deep shots here and there, but he's a pretty good quarterback, especially for a backup. He's one of the better ones in the league. Chase Brown should have some success on the ground because the Vikings defense is 25th in rushing EPA allowed on the ground, so he could get into a nice rhythm. And Chase Brown also has a chance to catch a lot of passes, like I said. So 15.5 receiving yards, I like the higher on that, and that will close out our entry. We're going to go with these 4 picks of Jonathan Taylor, of Alvin Kamara, Chase Brown, and Jordan Mason. Last week, we actually hit on our entry. We did flex it, so we only got 3 out of 4, but it did cash for a small profit. If you guys do want to tail this, new customers over on Underdog can play $5 and get $50 instantly in bonus funds when you play that first $5 entry. And you can also get this Malik Neighbors gimme pick if you use the promo code FSE, which is linked down below in the pinned comment. We're going to let this one fly again as a flex play. So if it hits, it's going to end up being like a 6X or a 6.5X. If you want to tail it, head on down to the link in the pinned comment, use the code FSE, 50% deposit match on your first deposit as well, up to $1,000 in bonus funds. So if you guys want to tail that, definitely check that out. But our next guy on the list here is RB16, Ashton Jeanty. Some of you guys gave me crap for putting him all the way down at like RB21 last week, but I think it was kind of warranted because the Chargers' run defense is very good, and Washington's run defense in this game is pretty good. But I like Jeanty a little bit more this week because he has a chance to get a lot more volume. We've heard some of the chatter from Jeanty, from the team, about getting him more involved in week 3. The challenge is this Commanders' run defense is also pretty tough against the run. Marcus Mariota will be starting on the other side of this game, so I think that this keeps this one close, and even the Raiders could potentially win this one. But I do think under no circumstances Dylan Laube and Zamir White should be taking touches away from the 6th overall pick. So to me, this seems like a squeaky wheel gets the grease game after 57% of the snaps in week 2. They're not going to let that happen again. Give them 80, 85, 90% of the snaps. 20 plus touches on the ground. I know Ashton Jeanty has started out pretty slow for those of you guys that drafted him near the 1-2 turn, and especially if you paired him with like Brian Thomas Jr., you're probably like 0-2 right now. But I will say it should be looking up for Ashton Jeanty going forward, and he is one of my bigger buy lows at the running back position, as I talked about in Wednesday's video. Running back 17 for me is Javonte Williams versus the Chicago Bears. We got a big, beautiful 50.5 point over-under in week 3. The Bears can't stop a nosebleed with a U-Haul full of gauze right now. They're back-to-back NFC Player of the Week, J.J. McCarthy and Jared Goff. What do they have in common? Well, they play the Chicago Bears defense. So I think that Dak Prescott's going to move the ball at will in this game. Javonte Williams is getting an ungodly 75% of the opportunities and the backfield snaps here. Expect him to have opportunities to find the end zone. And he has surprisingly been running back 4 in fantasy through the first 2 games of the season. I did not have that on my bingo card. As much as I've previously loved Javonte Williams in years past, I didn't think he was going to look this good, and you have to feel very confident in Javonte Williams if you drafted him in the 7th round and the 8th round. It kind of pisses me off that I drafted him in the Flock League last year. I was a year too early on the breakout. Breece Hall, running back for the New York Jets, going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They are 27th against fantasy football running backs, and a large part of that is because we've been allowing a lot of receiving touches to the running back position. You think about last week, obviously you had that Nick Chubb breakaway touchdown. I do think they let him score on that play. But other than that, we saw Woody Marks get it done through the air. We saw Bijan get 100 yards receiving in that first game. And Breece Hall is back to his full workload, 60% of the snaps through the first 2 games. The 11% target share is one that I do think will correct itself this week. The Jets are 6.5-point underdogs. Tyrod Taylor is starting for the team. And with an older conservative quarterback, you got to imagine that Breece Hall is going to get involved in the receiving game, some run after catch opportunities. Trust me, our linebackers can't cover anybody right now. So I do think that Breece Hall is probably going to have a bounce back game, at least as it pertains to a receiving workload. Moving into the C tier plays here, we have Chuba Hubbard, James Conner, Kyren Williams, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard, and Amarian Hampton. Chuba Hubbard is my running back 19 on the week. He could not find the end zone against the Falcons last year, the one time he played against them, but he was very efficient against them. 6 targets, 92 rushing yards, 5.1 yards per carry. The Falcons have been a really good front through the first 2 weeks of the season. They are running the 4th most offensive plays, the Carolina Panthers, so that bodes well for them. But the opposite side of that coin is that the Falcons have slowed their opponents down. They are actually allowing the 4th least offensive plays run against them. So if I had to guess, it's probably going to be a down week for Chuba Hubbard. You love the workload, 71% of the snaps, 70% of the carries, 63% of the routes. Excellent workload for Chuba Hubbard. But the way the Falcons are playing defense against teams is that they're slowing games down, running the ball with Bijan Robinson, and I do think this game could end up hitting the under the way that the Falcons have approached their season. If Carolina gets going on offense, then it's possible that this game does shoot out, but I do think the way the Falcons are playing on defense, you kind of have to respect it through the first 2 games of the season. Slowing down the Buccaneers offense and, of course, slowing down the Vikings offense as well. Running back 20 for me is James Conner versus the San Francisco 49ers. Brutal matchup against a top 5 EPA defense in San Francisco. Conner also had his snaps cut into for the first time in Trey Benson's career. He took away that 2-minute drill, long down and distance type of stuff. So James Conner previously was getting that going into last year and the year before that. The Cardinals are bottom 5 right now as a defense in plays per drive allowed and 23.5 first downs per game allowed, which is also bottom 5. So I think there's a very good chance that the San Francisco 49ers dominate the time of possession in this game, even though it's Mac Jones starting. I do think that the way that the Cardinals are playing on defense, allowing a bunch of plays, allowing a bunch of first downs, that bodes negatively for James Conner's ability to get as many carries as possible, because if they don't have possession of the ball, James Conner is getting less carries, especially if they're playing from behind in some of these games. Even though they're a 2-0 team, I do think they could be playing from behind against San Francisco here. So James Conner, maybe if he has a good game in this one, maybe look to sell high on him, because right now he's the RB18 in fantasy. He's been fine through the first 2 weeks. He's been able to find the end zone for the most part, but I do think if he has a good game, 18, 20 points, you may want to potentially sell high on him the way that Trey Benson is inching into his workload. 21 for me is Kyren Williams versus the Philadelphia Eagles. He's seen a nice chunk of his workload get diminished from Blake Corum last week, 69% of the snaps versus the Titans. Corum, let's see what he commands going forward, because if he's going to continue to be like a 30-40% snap share guy, that is going to take away a lot from Kyren Williams. Even though Kyren Williams hasn't looked great so far, he is still the RB21 in points per game because he's been able to, be decent on his workload and find the end zone in week 1. Blake Corum looked good, though, man. He averaged 8 yards per carry and scored a touchdown and basically sniped it away from Kyren Williams. So I would say maybe stash Blake Corum if he's available on your waiver wire. And we also saw how brutal the Eagles matchup can be for opposing running backs when they have Jalen Carter back. Pacheco and Hunt did absolutely nothing against them in week 2. So keep that in mind for the Rams running backs. Could be a down week for them. Running back 22 for me is DeAndre Swift. Swift is not playing well, but the Dallas defense is really susceptible to the run. They're 22nd against it, and he is getting a nice workload, even though it got diminished in week 2, only 56% of the snaps. We saw Kyle Menengai actually jump up over 40% and take away a lot of touches. I tend to think that the Swift workhorse usage will probably end going forward, but DeAndre Swift is set up for a nice game this week because it is a high over-under game, 50.5 points. If he overperforms his workload this week, let's say he has 60% of the snaps but scores 20 fantasy points because it's a high-scoring game environment, I would probably look to sell high on DeAndre Swift. But if you have him, you probably do want to put him into your lineup given the game environment that we have there. Running back 23 for me is Tony Pollard versus the Indianapolis Colts. Tony P is doing the absolute least with his huge workload, 89% of the snaps. Part of it was matchup related. You had the Rams defense, the Broncos defense the last 2 weeks, inarguably 2 of the best defenses in the league. Cam Ward has actually looked okay. Given those circumstances, I kind of expected him to look worse. I low-key feel like Pollard actually is a quiet buy low, because even though he is not producing at all, I mean, he's averaging 8.6 fantasy points per game right now, 89% of the snaps in back-to-back weeks is pretty hard to ignore, and this matchup is much more favorable than the ones that we've seen. So if you do need a running back and you're looking for like kind of a cheaper RB2 to go after, I do think Tony Pollard is not a bad option to go send some offers for. Running back 24, closing out this tier for me, is Amari Hampton versus the Denver Broncos. They are 25th ranked against the run. I know it's been bad for Amari Hampton, but here's why you can be optimistic still on this dude, because he's been pretty bad, 5.8 fantasy points per game through the first 2 weeks. The workload is still great. He's a young player. He should improve game by game. And I think when it rains, it'll pour for Amari Hampton. Once he figures things out, breaks off a couple long runs, starts to understand the speed of an NFL offense, I do think that's probably when he really takes over this backfield. Najee Harris is dust. He's not a major threat to Amari Hampton's workload, even though he did play more snaps in week number 2. And the more important thing here is that Justin Herbert's playing great, and they're moving the ball at will on offense. You finally have a run funnel defense, because they have been going up against a couple pass funnel defenses in a row that just got gashed by Jonathan Taylor, a very similar archetype of running back to Amari Hampton. So if he scores 4 fantasy points in week 3, I would start to get worried about Amari Hampton, but I do think this could be the week where he starts to adjust what our expectations are for him. I would love to see like another 70% snap share game, but let's score some fantasy points here, Amari. And I think we need to see you, put up 18 points or something like that, because this is a defense that you should be able to score on the ground against, when we've seen that Denver has been susceptible to fantasy running backs through the first 2 games. Moving down into the next group of guys, we have David Montgomery versus the Ravens at 25, Isaiah Pacheco on Sunday Night Football versus the Giants at 26, Jaylen Warren at 27, Bill Merritt at 28, Quinshon Judkins 29, and Ramondre Stevenson at 30. With David Montgomery, again, 53-point over-under. That's all I got to say. The Baltimore defense is susceptible to the run so far this year, and David Montgomery could easily find the end zone twice in this game, and it wouldn't shock me. This is the type of game you dream of for David Montgomery, because his workload is not great, but when they have a high-scoring game environment, that's when you want to be playing David Montgomery. So definitely make sure he is in your lineup as a high-end RB3. Isaiah Pacheco, I feel like I'm the last Isaiah Pacheco truther on earth, but the Giants are 6-point underdogs, 60% of the snaps for Pacheco last week, and that's a nice workload. The problem with Pacheco is that he's not been playing well, and an easy matchup is exactly what he needs to get right. The Giants are bottom 5 against the run by literally every metric. DVOA allowed, EPA per rush allowed, success rate allowed, fantasy points, a run defense grade on PFF. Like literally everything points to this defense being terrible against the run. So Isaiah Pacheco against the Giants, if he doesn't have at least 12 to 15 fantasy points in this game, I would start to feel very, very worried about him. If he's on your waiver wire, because I've seen people talk about dropping him, definitely go pick him up before this game. If you're looking to make a trade and you need something to balance out one of the sides, tack on Isaiah Pacheco to the other side of that deal, because I do think we might feel very different about Isaiah Pacheco when he's not on an 0-2 football team, because I don't think anybody expects that to continue, and he has better matchups, because the Eagles with Jalen Carter, very good run defense in week 1. Chargers, top 5 run defense in the league. We saw what they did to Genty as well. Things could be looking up for Isaiah Pacheco pretty soon. Running back 27 for me is Jaylen Warren. People are probably screaming that I have Isaiah Pacheco ranked over him this week, but again, if you want to start Jaylen Warren over him, that's totally fine. New England's run defense has been quite decent. But this game has a nice game environment quietly. 44.5-point over-under. Warren is currently the RB13 in fantasy right now after some big plays and some solid usage. I would consider selling high on him, because I do think his workload mirrors more of like a DeAndre Swift type, and he's outperformed that level of play. And also, too, Kenneth Gainwell is a part of this backfield, and even though Caleb Johnson is playing like garbage right now, it's possible that he takes over some work as the season goes along. So if you have Jaylen Warren, I would definitely shop him, try and get a better option. See if you could sell Jaylen Warren right now for Amari Hampton, for Trevion Henderson, because I would prefer those rookies rest of season, especially if you're out to like a 2-0 start or something. New England was pretty stingy against Genty and Achane the first 2 weeks, so I do expect Jaylen Warren maybe to have a down week in this one. Moving into Bill Krosky-Merritt here. The Las Vegas Raiders were very good against the run in the first 2 games. Bill is actually PFF's highest graded running back through 2 weeks of the NFL season. The problem is he's only seen 14 total touches. So with Austin Eckler out for the year now, how do things change? Is Bill getting a bigger workload? Is he going to still be 30 to 50% of the snaps? Is Jeremy McNichols going to take over the full Austin Eckler workload? Is Chris Rodriguez now involved? Or does Bill just carve out a 60% of the snaps type of thing. I think everybody's going to throw him into their lineup thinking that's going to happen, but I will caution you saying that that might not happen right away because he is still a 7th round rookie. It's possible that they use Jeremy McNichols or Chris Rodriguez as bigger parts of the backfield than people want to see. Running back 29 for me is Quinshon Judkins versus the Green Bay Packers. Very similar usage for Judkins as we have for Bill here. In a tough matchup versus the Ravens and a bad game script in the second half, he was clearly the Browns' best ball carrier. He was a high 2nd round pick. It's a game environment where, yes, the Browns are 8.5-point underdogs to the Packers, but they did stick around in the first 2 weeks with the Bengals and with the Ravens. I do think that Judkins could at least jump to a 50 to 60% snap share workload in week 3, and he looked good in his limited opportunity, so that is definitely good news for him. Running back 30 for me is Ramondre Stevenson versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's been getting a great workload through the first 2 games. I just frankly don't buy that this is going to keep happening, so I don't have him ranked very aggressively. Maybe you could argue that I'm way too low on the guy because Trevion Henderson only played like 30% of the snaps, and I have him ranked like 4 spots behind Ramondre Stevenson, but again, I can't buy that Ramondre Stevenson is having this huge renaissance workload. He's looked better, which is great, but I do think I'm a little bit skeptical on playing him every week. The Steelers are a good matchup, though, so you could definitely throw him out there and definitely do worse. Moving into the next tier of plays, closing out this video, we have J.K. Dobbins versus the Chargers. Not a great matchup, even though he's seeing a fine workload and is a revenge game for him. I don't feel great about starting him, so if you don't have to, definitely don't. Nick Chubb against the Packers, he's not getting a great workload right now. He's getting carries, which is good, but like I said, it looks like the Buccaneers let him score on that final play, and if that didn't happen, we're probably not talking about Nick Chubb in any kind of positive light whatsoever, and the Packers are a really good run defense as of now. Trevion Henderson, again, let's see the workload uptick a little bit. He's getting nice target volume when he's on the field, but for some reason, we heard going into last week that the Patriots wanted to get him more involved, and then he played 29% of the snaps, so I want to see what happens there. The Steelers are a very susceptible defense to the run. RJ Harvey versus the Chargers. There's buzz, there's whispers that a workload increase is coming. You should buy low on RJ Harvey right now because if J.K. Dobbins gets another good workload, his price is even going to go down even more. But the second RJ Harvey is 50% of the snaps, 60% of snaps, it's over. The buying window is closed, and this guy is going to be a top 20 running back rest of the season, top 24 running back rest of the season. So go buy low on RJ Harvey right now while you still can. And then closing out this video, I have the 2 New York Giants running backs, Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scadaboo, both going up against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Tracy had his workload majorly affected by Cam Scadaboo last week. I was not expecting that. Going into week 2, we were talking about Tyrone Tracy as, yeah, this guy's a top 24 running back rest of the season because he had a 73% snap share in week 1. And then all of a sudden, Cam Scadaboo out snaps, out carries him, runs more routes than him in week number 2 against the Dallas Cowboys. Not sure why that happened. We'll see if that continues. But for now, you can't really feel comfortable about starting either of these guys, knowing that it's a backfield split, at least down the middle, like it was in week 2. So until we see more concrete usage for Tyrone Tracy and for Cam Scadaboo, I have no idea who to trust in this backfield. And it's probably a negative game script for the Giants. I think the Chiefs will probably take this one easily. So I would say probably avoid them if you can help. So that is the end of the video. Those were my top 36 running backs ranked in order. If you guys have a start sit question, leave it down below in the comments. I'll try and get to as many as I can. Of course, if it's running back related, the answer was in this video. But if you have a wide receiver versus running back flex question or whatever, I can definitely answer those for you. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Stay tuned for later today. Danny will be dropping the wide receiver tier list. And of course, if you want all of our rankings, rest of season, weekly, dynasty rankings undergoing a big time update through the first couple weeks of the season, the dynasty trade value chart also going to be updated going into week 4 next week. Head on over to flockfantasy.com. Use the code FSE when you sign up. You can get the season pass still. That'll cover you from now until the rest of the season. That'll get you some bonus start, sit, and trade vouchers to ask us questions on the site as well. And you'd, of course, get our weekly rankings, rest of season rankings for the rest of the year. So definitely check that out if you guys are interested. If you want an annual Mother Flocker package, you can also get a free team review to use live on the channel. We do those live reviews on Mondays specifically, but then sometimes on Thursdays and Sundays as well. So definitely check that out if you guys are interested. That'll be linked down below in the pinned comment, as is Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to tail the entry that we built out today, we are doing this one as a flex, so hopefully we can end up cashing it. If you are a new customer, like I said, you can get the Malik Neighbors gimme pick for Sunday Night Football and up to $1,000 in bonus funds on your first deposit. When you make a deposit, make sure to use the promo code FSE. And of course, once you make your first play, $5, you get $50 in bonus funds. So a ton of promos going on over on Underdog. So check that out if you guys are interested down below in the pinned comment. But with that being said, peace out, and I'll talk to you soon.